As we're getting started, can you please look at your Slido and answer the question there. We're going to create a word cloud, and at the end of this session we're going to redo the word cloud and see did anybody change their minds about what we're talking about. So just as everybody's taking their seats and coming in, what's the best way to engage business? Everybody's gone very quiet. So you're all thinking. Yes? Money. Oh, can you put it in your Slido? Just type it in. That's all right. Somebody type in money, please. Okay, so as we're getting this word cloud, nothing is really popping out right now, but why don't I just introduce myself and we can, environmental enforcement just popped out really strongly. Let me just introduce myself and we can get moving. My name is Margaret O'Gorman. I'm the president of the Wildlife Habitat Council, which most of you in this room have never heard of. We're an international NGO based in Washington, D.C., and for the last 30 years, we've been working exclusively with business to do conservation on business lands. So we really work at the pragmatic end of biodiversity, about the just do it end. As Inger Anderson said this morning, biodiversity matters, and our mantra is that every act of conservation matters. So what we're really talking about today is business and biodiversity and what they can do on the ground. So we've got action-oriented discussion today, and we have a really strong panel that I'll be introducing to you in a moment. But before I do that, I just want to frame up the discussion today, and this is why I want to see how this word cloud works. But I think we can just put this word cloud to bed right now if people can keep a mental image of what was most important, what was not important, and also all of the things that were up there. And then I've just got a couple of slides. Then our panelists have some slides of the programs that they are doing, that they're going to go through a very brief presentation of their work, and then we're going to have a conversation, and I certainly want that conversation informed by questions either from the floor or through the Slido. So getting started, I always start with this slide because it's just really beautiful for a start. It attracts people to come to my talks because they can see it. This is a piping plover chick. And piping plovers in the US are a federally endangered species. There are two populations of piping plovers in the US, one that migrates up the eastern seaboard of the US from its wintering grounds in Bermuda and the Bahamas up to its breeding grounds in the mid-Atlantic states of New Jersey and Massachusetts and places like that. The other population flies up through the Midwest up to the Great Lakes. And the birds their chicks are amazing. They're called precocial, because they basically, the minute they hatch, they're on their own. They're not fed like bald eagles are fed for 6 weeks. They're not housed like humans are housed for about 30 years. Piping plovers are actually off and doing their thing and getting fed from the minute that they hatch. And the eggs that they're in, when they're in their eggs, the eggs are so well camouflaged on the sand that they can't be seen. They're just laid in a little rut in the sand and they're not seen. The biggest threat to the survival of the piping plover is people. So what happens with the piping plover is they fly from their wintering grounds in the Bahamas and Bermuda. They fly up these beautiful, empty beaches on the east coast of the US, gorgeous barrier beaches, beautiful islands, and they decide that's a great place to lay their eggs. And then in the US, Memorial Day comes and it's like a light switch goes on. Everybody goes to the beach, pets, people, kids, frisbees, etc., etc. And these really well camouflaged eggs get trodden on by people if they are not protected. So thinking about the Midwest, the shore of Lake Michigan. And on the shore of Lake Michigan, there is a steel plant. It's owned by ArcelorMittal, which is one of the largest steel companies in the world. And on that steel plant, they have restored 40 acres of habitat that is pristine now, piping plover habitat. Before they restored it, it had 40-foot-high piles of slag, and slag is an off-product of the steelmaking industry. It was full of rubbish. It was non-productive land. But the people on the site decided that they wanted to do something for nature, and they took back 40 acres and they regraded it and they helped the hydrology come back. The last time I was there was an American kestrel on the site. That site is across the fence line from a national park, which is the National Indiana Dunes Recreation Area. The National Indiana Dunes Recreation Area is a federal national park in America. The habitat on the steel mill for the piping plover is much better than the habitat on the national park. Why? There's no people on the steel mill, and on the national park, every resident of Chicago comes out there to play in the summer. So by creating these 40 acres of restored land on an active steel mill, this steel mill makes steel for the auto industry every single day, it's actually creating better habitat than the national park protected lands that are across the fence. So I like to just put that framework in your head. That's where we're coming from today, is thinking about corporate lands in a different way and how they can make that contribution to nature, which is nature coming back and nature restoring itself and being part of the optimistic story of biodiversity. And what we're really focused on, hang on a minute, technology. I have no idea how to use this thing. So the next slide, when I get there, is the reasons that business does biodiversity. And there are 16 common reasons. And these reasons are, they're all black. Oh, this thing, I thought it was this thing. Ah, there you go. So anyway, these are the 16 reasons that business does biodiversity. Only one of them is biodiversity. And when you work with business, you need to think about that. Why is this business engaging in biodiversity? Is it because it has a biodiversity impact? Or is it to secure their social license to operate? Is it as a remediation remedy to clean up a toxic site? Or is it because they want to take nature-based action on climate change? So when we are talking today, our panelists today, they're going to talk about what they're doing, but they're also going to talk about why they're doing it. And I think when we think about that, I speak a lot at conferences where there's an NGO community, and the first thing I say is, don't ask me how to get money from a corporation. Ask me how you can work with a corporation. And I think there's a huge difference to that. When you're working with companies and sites that have low margins, that have economic cycles, that have disruptions, you want to have a relationship that is not a philanthropic one, but an actual impactful relationship. So that's enough for me. What we're going to do is get into a conversation later. But we're going to start off with Bernadette Phelan. And Bernadette is from the business, I just checked that, business, I knew it was BIC, Business in the Community Ireland. And Bernadette has some really interesting thing that she's going to launch for us today. I won't say any more than that.
Hello. And actually, I'm so delighted to be part of today's conversation, because for me, one of the most important things is there's business, there's policymakers, and then NGOs all in the room. So I think today is really important. And Hannah Hamilton and Deirdre Lynn, hats off to you both in pulling this all together. So Business in the Community, for those of you that don't know us, we are a NGO ourselves, and our sole mission is to work with business to support them in their own journey around sustainability and CSR. At the moment, we have a core network of around 90 companies that we work with, but nationally, through our social impact programs in education and employment, in total, we actually work with about 250 companies. We're 20 years in existence, and if you actually look at our history, we very much mirror, I think, the journey of sustainability and corporate social responsibility. When we started, it was very much about how business can work within their communities, the volunteering piece, and the charity engagement, which is still a core part of what Irish business does in regard to its CSR. But over the last 20 years, it's gone from community development, the environmental agenda. At the moment, it's about how do we transition to a low carbon economy. And we're getting into really complex issues where you actually see investors wanting to talk about sustainability. We're now talking a language of risk, non-financial reporting, and it's an agenda that's in the boardroom. And I think that's really significant as well in terms of seeing how the biodiversity agenda has played into the work that we're doing. And it was about mid-2015 that we identified that companies were actually really struggling to articulate how they could play a constructive role. Like Margaret, your example is absolutely fabulous in terms of talking about the steel plant. But I would imagine there was a gestation and a journey to actually get to that realization. So it was about mid-2015 we decided that we wanted to design an education and awareness program to actually really engage with business. And it was ourselves working with Hannah in Ayr Wild. We consulted with Trinity, we consulted with the National Biodiversity Centre, we worked with our colleagues in business and the community in Northern Ireland. And we devised a biodiversity framework. And its function was actually to help business understand why biodiversity matters to them and actually help come up with a menu of practical things that we can do. Because business like doing and they like to get to action. So it was about trying to cultivate that. So we've been hosting a series of workshops with business over the last number of years. We've been doing one-to-one work. And today actually is a really good milestone for us. We have the joy of publicly releasing our first biodiversity handbook for business. And you'll be able to get soft copies. But I know Hannah and my team, Nick Reynolds and Killian Mahan, that have put the hard work into developing this, and for the businesses that are involved in it. It really, I think, is an important signal from Irish business. We've got 9 case studies in it at the moment. We hope that when we produce this in a year or two, we'll have a lot more case studies in it. And for me, it's a way of getting the conversation going. We can now have a better framing when we're sitting down with policymakers. We can now develop a better common language with NGOs. When I look at the case studies that we've included, for me, and it actually mirrors what you were saying about the business case, every sector has a role to play here. We understand that SSE, we're talking here earlier, road bridge, for companies with really big sites, there's an absolute core imperative that they have to be engaged, and they are engaged within this. But if you have an office, there's also a huge role that you can play. So when you look at the case studies, there's different sectors, there are different business drivers at play. So I would invite you to have a look at our handbook. We're very open to talking to other interested parties. You're going to hear from Dawn Meats and Intel today. But I think the conference and the 2 days that we've had here is really exciting. And I think actually the announcement around having a business platform is a really significant outcome from the proceedings that have been going on today. So, thank you very much.
So congratulations to all involved in getting this handbook out. It sounds like it's a great thing, and I've got a hard copy, so I'm going to be reading that. But it's my great pleasure to welcome Eamonn O'Reilly up to the podium, and he's going to talk about the cool work and the cool thinking that Dublin Port is doing around their master planning.
Great. Thanks very much. 5 slides, all pictures. This to me is an absolutely beautiful picture of a highly industrial port which is growing hugely in terms of throughput for the very simple reason that everybody in this room keeps buying stuff. And the more that people buy, the more we need this infrastructure. We've got a master plan to 2040 aiming to bring this to maximum capacity on its existing footprint. And we need to worry in a couple of years' time, is there going to be extra capacity needed somewhere else on the East Coast? So here's the industrial port. I could talk for an hour in terms of growth rates, average annual growth rates, TUs per hectare per annum, all that sort of good stuff, and you'd be glad to hear that I won't. We've probably spent €2 million in the last couple of years on environmental impact assessment reports, strategic environmental assessments, and we've got great value from it, and as far as it's allowed us to get planning permissions. It kills me. So much scientific work has been done by great scientists. There is not a single piece of that that is actually useful, that comes out, goes into the biodiversity community to inform them of all the work that's been done. So we're spending a huge amount of money to get over that minimalist bar of getting our planning permissions. We are doing the right minimalist thing. And that, for me, isn't enough. There's a line I've been using, and Inger Anderson used it today, so I was very, very pleased by that. Nobody sends us an invoice for the damage that we do to the environment. So we get over that minimum hurdle, we get our planning permissions, and we build like mad. Last year we spent 93 million euros in capital investment. Over the next 10 years, we're going to spend $1 billion in this place. Tomorrow I have a board meeting when I'm going to try and get approval to raise 300 million to finance that plan. But nobody is sending us an invoice. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't do the right thing. There's a lot of talk about the them and the us. And I've always resisted that dichotomy. Just when I put on the suit in the morning, I don't think, how today am I going to try and destroy the environment that I live in? So when I go around the port, these are the sort of things that I see. These are Brent geese on Alex Quay East, Alex Quay West, my apologies. I don't think the ornithologists monitoring Brent geese realised how many of them were coming actually into the heart of the port, interacting with the operations there, and then cooling their jets, floating around Alex Basin for a while. There's an awful lot of terns in Dublin Port. There's SPA tern colonies, and we've put rafts out. We've worked very closely with Birdwatch Ireland, and for a couple of reasons. The main reason actually was to try to understand the motivation and this whole world that we're not particularly well equipped or educated to understand. I'm an engineer, I'm sometimes mistaken for an accountant, I'm never mistaken for an ecologist. So we've worked a lot with Birdwatch Ireland, and the amount of research being done, we're delighted to put money into this because actual real science and PhDs comes from this by comparison to what we've done on our environmental impact and SEA work. There's a river lamprey. The river lamprey was taken from the river and carefully returned, I hasten to add, as part of the necessary science we were doing to get through our EIA process. Now, all of the work that was done on that, again, I go back to my basic point, I'm not sure, I think I know the answer, I think it's zero scientific value from all the work done by some of Ireland's best scientists in areas such as fish. We've had experts on the benthos, experts on marine mammals, experts on birds, experts in general ecology, earning a living, doing very important work, but that work not contributing. So, when I look at Dublin Port, and here's the port in its real context, there you can see Bull Island, you can see the river channel, you can see the bay. What we know we need to do, and we're setting out now to create a natural capital policy within the company. First thing we did in order to get our development of the port on track was to create a master plan. It says this is the infrastructure we're going to build. We knew we needed to engage with the local communities, and we set up a thing called our Salt Valley Strategic Framework, and it would take me a while to explain that. But that has delivered things like the diving bell on John Rogerson's Quay. You might have seen the work we've done on East Wall Road to break down the physical barrier. It's created a song cycle. This year, if you like theatre, go along to the Abbey's production at the Theatre Fest in September, you'll see a play that we've commissioned. This third area, I think this is the third pillar now, we need to get into the corporate thinking. So the natural capital policy is designed to give us a framework to identify what's our impact on the environment and how should we, without anybody legislating or anybody beating us up, how should we correctly as a company address the impact that we are having both through our construction and through our operation. So what we've committed to, and it's one of the seeds that Minister Madigan will announce later today, our seed is this natural capital policy. And in case you might think, well, that's just a corporate, nice policy, what's behind it? We will, during this year, be employing, firstly, an environmental scientist, and secondly, an ecologist. So our presence here at this conference and our support yesterday for the awards is really about trying to bring our company into the framework to think and understand what does it mean for us to take this next and correct step, create that framework to employ the real experts, and start to generate science, start to actually build habitats. What we want to do is to build habitats within the port, and it's quite feasible to do if we're spending $1 billion in 10 years, you don't need to do the sums, a tiny percentage of that will build a lot of habitats, and you can see all through that area that there are umpteen opportunities. I've seen fish cages in Marseille, where in hard industrial ports, fish habitats are being created. We're supporting a project just by giving access to our quay walls for bivalves to grow on tiles put onto our quay walls. We've done a lot of work and we understand a bit more about birds than we did in the past. We do a lot more work there. Everywhere we look, there's huge opportunity for us. We don't have the framework or the expertise yet to do the right thing, but that's what we're now committing to do. Did I do it in 3?
Close.
Sorry if I went over. Thank you.
All right. No, don't worry. Thank you very much. The challenge here is that everybody has a really interesting story to tell, and you could listen for more than the minutes that we have allocated. And, what Eamonn was saying about putting the habitats within the port, it's very much what the Convention on Biological Diversity, of which Ireland is a signatory to. It's trying to mainstream biodiversity into industry. And that's one of their biggest challenges, because they really don't know how to do it. And I think the example here of what Eamonn talked about is a really great one. So if he's got a board meeting, what time's your board meeting tomorrow? We'll all send really positive thoughts about the biodiversity aspects of any conversation there. So, our next speaker is David O'Flynn from Dawn Meats, and he's going to tell a great story about how they're working with their farmers on a conservation project. So, David, please come up.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks, Margaret. And Hannah's left the room, but I wanted to say thanks very much to Hannah as well for inviting us along. So as Margaret says, my name is David O'Flynn, and I head up CSR and Sustainability inside in Dawn Meats. And Dawn Meats is probably one of these kind of hidden companies within the food industry that people may or may not have heard of. So just to give a bit of context, we're a €2 billion beef and lamb business that process animals primarily in Ireland and the UK, beef and sheep. And even before I just jump into biodiversity, I wanted to put this slide up. And that's because I just wanted to paint our approach to biodiversity in the context of our approach to sustainability. And I found the first day and a half of this conference really fascinating, because everybody's talking about integrating and tying up. And even this morning, there was this huge talk about, it's not about biodiversity, it's about all the policies around biodiversity. And all the other policies that can actually influence biodiversity. And I suppose I would say that's our approach. The 5 pillars there are the main pillars of our sustainability strategy. And you don't see biodiversity called out there. But biodiversity is knitted, and I've highlighted 2 of them there in green. It's knitted into, very much into 2, but it cannot be supported without actually across all the pillars. I mean, anybody who's been involved in sustainability will realise that for any corporate, people will always be central to that. And it's people that actually allow us to drive and build on these projects. And we have a senior executive committee that actually sponsor these type of projects that we go on. And actually, again, it was in Ingrid's speech this morning. She was going, she'd love an apex goal like the Parcs agreement has, 1.5 degrees. We have this apex goal of being Europe's most sustainable meat company. That's not making any claims about where we are, where we're going to get to. Will we ever get there? Probably not, because it's across so many different pillars. How can you actually ever get to that goal? But it's really just a kind of a point that we're going to, that we're always looking to drive forward improvement. So over my next 3 slides, I'm really just going to talk about the layers that we approach sustainability on, both at a site level, at a more grand scheme level, and then actually at an industry level. So just at a site level, and I suppose this is probably, one of our luckier projects. I'm saying luckier, we actually happen to have the space. Not everybody has the space to, Dublin Port has a lot more space than we do, but we still have more space than a lot of other people. And this is a 7-acre wetland. The beauty about this wetland, and, it was interesting, the diagram there talked about finance money. For business, you need to make things work. You can do a certain amount of stuff philanthropically, but most of the time you actually have to make things work for a business. This wetland actually works for us. This wetland can save us about €20,000 a year, because alternatively we would have to conventionally clean our wastewater. But the beauty about this wetland is it gives back to the environment. And we have a photograph there. This little group here is a group of students that we have in from a local college, WIT, and they've come in every couple of years to run projects and see how the wetlands have been improving. During environmental weeks, we bring people in for walks. We've actually shown other industry players about how our wetland is working, and it has kind of, it's brought attention, and it's a nice thing. People on the site can actually go out and visit it. So the next scheme level then is at a scheme level. So it's unfortunate that there's 2 sessions in parallel, and I see Fergal down here who kindly invited us into this scheme. So a colleague Fergal is talking about this project actually in one of the other rooms. And this is actually a huge scheme, and it's a scheme that would be certainly outside the scope of ourselves to run. It's a €25 million scheme. It's across the area, kind of the size of Louth and Carlow over 6 SPAs. But what it does need is support from someone like ourselves, because this scheme, and it has been talked a lot about today, is how farmers actually are integral to driving sustainability on certain land types. And with this scheme, it's actually bringing animals up into these particular habitats and actually making them, better for the hen harrier, which again is an indicated species for a lot of other subspecies, within these ecosystems. Our appeal is it drives a lot of improvements that we're looking for. A big thing for ourselves at the moment is soil carbon sequestration. And that's not just in these habitats, but it's across loads of other habitats. But this is really an excellent example. We've also tried to get involved in other schemes. And when I say tried, sometimes they don't succeed or they don't get there. So there's another person here from Wildworks, and we've tried to develop a scheme with them. And it's not to say, or they've tried to develop it with us, and it doesn't mean we won't get there. And we also had an EIP project in which, if anybody saw Catherine Keena speaking in Chagas yesterday, looking at trying to improve hedgerows throughout Ireland. And I suppose the beauty of us is somebody like ourselves is we deal with 15,000 farmers or 15 to 20,000 farmers. So we have this really great reach, but you don't necessarily have the pockets to dig into and actually drive these projects yourselves. And then the final level I just want to touch on here is on an industry level. So the whole industry, and when I say the whole industry, all the processors, all the dairy cooperatives within it are supporting schemes such as the Sustainable Dairy Assurance Scheme or the Sustainable Beef and Lamb Insurance Scheme. And when I say we're supporting these, we actually support this with real money. So farmers who are part of the scheme are paid a premium if they meet certain criteria. Board Beer and Origin Green go out and audit these farms independently every 18 months. And they drive improvements. Are these improvements as far as we'd want to go? And we've heard a lot about that, about schemes being bespoke and getting the nature of them exactly right. What I would say is this is raising a baseline that other schemes can actually build on. And this is a really great example of another layer of collaboration where the whole industry is trying to drive an improvement within the sector. And just before I finish up, I just wanted to mention 2 other collaborations that we'd love to see more people get involved with. So people may be aware of the government CSR programme. And again, this is an initiative been driven by the government, and it's in second iteration. It's the 2017 to 2020 plan. And again, environment and biodiversity is part of that. And this can be supported by businesses or by people within the environmental sector. And the other one, which got a mention this morning by a couple of speakers, and I think Michael Ewing was going to talk about it, so I'm sure he will talk about it later, is the Sustainable Development Goals. At the moment, Joe Gallagher from the Department of Communication, Climate and Action has a call out for sustainability champions. So we're part of that. I'm not saying we necessarily will end up being a sustainability champion or not, but we've been part and attending the task force meetings. And again, there's a call out there for people to champion the different sustainable development goals, particularly obviously in this context 14 and 15, but it runs across the others. So if people aren't aware of that, look up. The deadline for that one is the end of this month. And there's a call out for people. And again, there's a real opportunity for business and civil society to collaborate on that. But thank you very much for the time.
Thank you. I'm sure there'll be more questions for David later. It sounds really interesting. And so just before I call Cathy Cronin from Intel up, one of the things that I've learned over the time I've worked in business and biodiversity is the further a company is away from the site of extraction, the less it is concerned in biodiversity, which makes sense in a way. But basically everything we buy, we eat, we wear comes out of the ground somewhere. So to have a technology company, because they can be the worst in many ways, they really don't see that they have an impact on the ground, although everything in our technology is taken out of the ground at some stage. So to have a company like Intel here today is really great for me, seeing that there is a technology company that can view nature outside of itself and do something. So Cathy.
Good afternoon, everyone, and just to say again, thank you for the invite today to give us the opportunity to talk about our biodiversity programme. Just a little bit about Intel first, for people who aren't familiar. Intel first set up at Leixlip, County Kildare in 1989, so next year is our 30th year at Leixlip. The site has grown considerably in size over the years, and we are Europe's leading semiconductor facility. We currently employ 4,500 people at the site, so essentially we're a mini community within the area of Leixlip, Maynooth and Selbridge. Very early on, Intel recognised the value of the natural features located at our site. We're very fortunate to have a special area conservation located north of the site along the River Rye. So you'll just see there at the top right hand corner there, the SAC runs from Maynooth down into Leixlip town. In the early 1990s, Intel recognised the potential biodiversity value of the River Rye, and it decided to set about to restore and enhance the River Rye. A number of restoration measures were taken, such as cutting back of vegetation and the provision of spawning beds. This work would not have occurred without the support of our key stakeholders at the time, such as local neighbours, Inland Fisheries, the Office of Public Works, and the technical expertise of UCD Aquins Group. For over 20 years now, Intel has a group in place called the Friends of the River Rye. This is made up of local fishermen, neighbours, Inland Fisheries, Kildare County Council, UCD and Carton House Estate. The common aim of this group is to be custodians of the River Rye. Intel sponsor annual surveying of the River Rye catchment. This work is carried out by UCD and Inland Fisheries. The information from these surveys are fed into the River Rye, the Friends of the River Rye group, for them to take action and to improve the River Rye. Employee engagement has been a key part of our biodiversity programme. We want our employees to appreciate and recognise the value of biodiversity. As far back as 2003, we were getting employees out into the natural features of our site and getting them to take photographs of flora and fauna to develop Intel's wild collection. In more recent years, we've renewed our employee focus through front of house biodiversity features. We've planted bluebells beside mature trees. We've put up bird boxes, bat boxes and insect hotels at the front of site. We've mapped out these areas as a biodiversity walking trail for employees. The final stop on the trail is Intel's Orchard, which is over 300 years old and contains 27 species of native Irish trees. We've put in picnic areas close to these areas, again to encourage people to actually sit with nature during their breaks. In 2015, we planted a wildflower meadow beside employee soccer pitches, again to raise awareness of biodiversity and also the All Ireland Pollinator Plan. Intel are a business supporter of this plan. Everything we learn, we want to share into the community. So some examples of the projects we've done in the community are putting up Swift boxes in local schools and also supporting community gardens with pollinator plants. We see collaboration as key to our programme. An example of a collaboration programme that we've put in place is the North Kildare Biodiversity Map. So again, this is all about promoting biodiversity in our local community and North Kildare. Intel is a learning organisation and we seek to learn from experts from all areas of society, whether it be universities, our own employees, non-profit organisations and external groups. We seek joined up thinking to how we all together can approach biodiversity to protect it and enhance it. We work in a fast-paced world, sometimes always connected to technology. We want our employees to stop and to reap the health benefits of the natural features of our workplace. We want the community to experience similar. Thank you for listening.
Okay, so our last presenter today may cause you to change your summer vacation plans if he does a good enough job. So Richard Watson is from Centre Parcs, which is a name that's well known in the UK, but will be better known here once Richard talks about his project. So please welcome Richard.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Margaret, and thank you very much for the invitation. I feel like I'm almost invading a little bit because Centre Parcs is obviously very new to Ireland, and I'm still venturing in, and the last 2 days has been very valuable in getting an insight into the biodiversity network in Ireland. For those of you who may not know, Centre Parcs are the leading family short break provider in the UK. And later this year, and this summer, we're bringing the concept to Ireland into County Longford. I suppose we have 5 sites in the UK, the last of which we opened in Bedfordshire in 2014. Site selection is obviously a key part of right at the very beginning of the process, and we choose commercial woodlands. They have low biodiversity value, and that site selection automatically gives you the opportunity to produce some really good gains. The key thing for me is, as I've said there, our forests are our primary asset. They give us the opportunity to provide the guests that come and stay with us a break in a very natural environment. And for a lot of our guests, that can often be their only experience in a natural environment because they live in towns and cities. When we rewrote our forest management plans back in 2012, we did an interesting piece of work, and we actually twisted and put quite a bit of focus within the forest management plans, because for an organisation such as ourselves, that we're a leisure business, we're a leisure and a leisure business that wants to grow. But it's very easy to talk about the activities that people can do, the swimming pool, and the building assets. But what we actually did was we twisted it on its head and said, actually, the forest is our principal asset. It is our unique selling point. And the focus very much, and it always has been in Centre Parcs' history, but we really did push a lot more focus onto the actual forest environment. Biodiversity is very much our culture, and it is delivered through the forest management plans. So each of our 5 sites has a detailed forest management plan, 10 years with a vision for 20 years. And we review that on a 5-year period. And it's sense checking how we're doing. That is underpinned through our biodiversity action targets. And it's a process that we've started in Longford. Obviously, there'll have been ecology surveys done for the original planning stage, but we're over last survey season and into the early part of this year, we've then done another suite of surveys, and this will inform where we are in terms of setting biodiversity action targets for that site and for Longford Forest over the next 5 years. One of the things that, or an award that we hold very dearly to our heart, and it is a really good indicator and sense check for us, although sometimes it can be painful going through it, as all audits are, is that we're holder for the UK Wildlife Trust's Biodiversity Benchmark Award. It may be an award that some of you are familiar with, but the UK Wildlife Trust set up this award in the region about 20 years ago, and it was challenging and looking at good practice from business in terms of supporting biodiversity. And it's an award that we're incredibly proud of and have held for over 15 years. And all of our sites hold it. And essentially, we will follow the same practices for County Longford and Longford Forest. It will be that we will be adopting the same standards. Our CEO has been very much of the opinion that nothing, unless there's legislation that it forces us to work differently, we will adopt the same practices and operate in exactly the same way as we do on our UK villages. For us, investment and management of the forest and its habitats is key to developing and growing our business. It is, a lot would argue, is quite an easy one for us because having that environment is one of the things that attracts people to come and want to stay at Centre Parcs. But with the in-house team that we have, the support that we have from our consultant ecologists, it is to keep maintaining those habitats and managing them in a responsible way. And I've tried to emphasise that with the slides that I've got here, is you can see I've put at the heart and at the middle of it, it is about management of the forest. And we very much take the approach is our key is about managing the habitat. And whatever wildlife wants to come and stay and come to our sites, we will look after it. And we're incredibly fortunate that out at Longford Forest, we already have some very notable species in terms of the lamprey in the waterways. We've got otter to the north of the site. We've got pine marten, and we've got red squirrel. Red squirrel is something that we're very passionate about anyway, because our site in Winfell Forest in Cumbria is obviously red squirrels in the UK, very much in decline and have small, very localised populations. And we actually support and have our own red squirrel ranger who spends his whole time out and about controlling grey squirrel numbers to support the red squirrel population. Hopefully I'm doing all right for time. Margaret just asked if it'd be possible to have a slide sort of showing the forest and to leave as a sort of thought in terms of, where our approach in terms of forest management is to shift the emphasis of the site to go from a purely coniferous woodland and make it of a more mixed woodland. So hopefully in sort of 15, 20 years, if we're continuing it to do it right, that picture will be very much different as well. As I say, it is our first venture, but we do have a lot of experience in terms of what we've been doing on our UK villages for the last 30 years. Thank you very much.
Okay, so actually let's give another round of applause to our really interesting storytellers, our great storytellers. Yeah, thank you so much. How does one get a job as a red squirrel ranger? I want to put that on my business card.
Jerry's not giving it up very easily, put it that way.
Okay. So we're just going to have a few questions that we talked about earlier, and we will revisit the poll. And if we have time, we can take questions from the floor if there are pressing questions, but I'm sure some of our panelists will hang out afterwards. Oh, there are questions already. Okay. But the question I want to ask first, so I'm going to take advantage of my pulpit here, is Eamonn, why bother? Why not do the minimum?
Because it's my environment as well. When I finish doing what I'm doing on the port, it's not good enough for me personally to go and say, look, I increased throughput, or it increased 60% under my watch. We invested Y million. That's not good enough. To me, it's that simple. And there's a question, and I'm not getting at you now, but this question that immediately puts the if you like, the company executive into the box. I always resist that. Always resist that, because I was born in Dunleary. I've been swimming in the 40-foot for 50 years. I walk the pier every day. It's my environment. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going, I wouldn't work for let me answer. Okay, I have the answer for you. I wouldn't work for an employer who demanded for my salary that I did damage to the environment. It wouldn't feel right. I wouldn't like to go home and look at myself in the mirror.
Yes.
So to me, it's that simple.
Yeah.
And I think, as I discussed this with the board members of the company, I haven't met a single board member of the company who thinks otherwise, who says, Jays, let's go out and kill a few seals. Let's kill a few Brent geese. Mm-hmm. Nobody talks like that. So really it's just a question of doing the right thing. To me, it is that straightforward.
Yeah, well, wish all executives thought exactly like you. It would be very simple. But I like what you say about there's not a dichotomy between the man in the suit and the person outside exploring nature. It's the same person. So I think that's always an interesting thing to think about when we view companies as these behemoths of just action, and how when you talk to a person, it's a completely different thing. And Richard, you guys started really, to help with the planning process, but you found that the results kind of helped motivate the companies to do even more.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, just by having the processes that we've got in place and the biodiversity action targets, by having that robust forest management plan, yes, it has the benefit for the business in terms of how we manage our site, how the site looks for the guests that are coming to stay with us. But as I said, we do want our business to grow. We want it to be successful. And I think it's not the reason we do it, but it does act as a benefit in that when we are engaging with planning authorities and key stakeholders, I think they see the value in the fact that we do take a responsible approach to the habitats that we are responsible for, and we do invest in our biodiversity, as I say, through our forest management plans, through the biodiversity action target, through the way we manage our site. It is not just we're a developer and that is our sole aim. We do take a responsible approach in terms of our management of our site. So there is that benefit sort of associated with it.
Yeah. And Cathy, your benefit was a community engagement benefit.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of our employees would live in the local community as well, so we'd be conscious of that. And also, I suppose, we'd rely on the community to also input into what we should be doing, but also things that we're doing, we'd share out into the community. So there's a mutual benefit between the relationships that we have with the community and external stakeholders like non-profit organisations.
Yeah. It's those co-benefits that make it really valuable for a company to do it. And David, you've spoken about social license to operate, how important that is as a co-benefit to what you're doing.
Yes. Look, there's a lot of drivers for us to be involved in this area. Our business is so connected to the land. Okay, we don't farm it, but ultimately the survival of a business will be dependent on the survival of the land. And but also increasingly, so while Dawn Meats might be a hidden company, many of the companies we sell to, some of the main retailers and food service companies, are very visible, and they need to have a trusted supply chain, a supply chain that will actually, not bring reputational damage, to the fore, because increasingly consumers are asking questions. I suppose we've just been recently through the whole plastic bag, period, driven by some media. And I suppose the hope of everybody in this room is that biodiversity becomes the next plastic bag, and that it will actually, push this agenda even further. And you can't switch on the biodiversity tap overnight. You have to have been doing it before the consumer really pushes it. And this is recognised by businesses. So it's not just a social licence to operate, but it actually goes to the very essence of protecting it. And while certain aspects of livestock may not be as vulnerable as other areas of agriculture, we all realise that if we don't protect it, and actually for us it's really about soil. Soil and the microbes. And I don't know, was it a speaker yesterday said that there was 10 times, I think they said there was about 20 tons, I can't remember what it was. It was a significant multiple in terms of the amount of microorganisms weight compared to the actual animals above the ground. That's or actually below the ground. I can't remember the numbers that they put out there. But I don't think people spend much time thinking about soil. We spend a huge amount thinking about soil, not only because it helps sequester carbon, but actually if you improve soil, you actually reduce the amount of fertilizer you use, which reduces nitrogen runoff, but it also makes the economics for farmers better. So in the world that we live in, you're always looking for wins, but undoubtedly, if something is good to do for the business, you will find it's good to do for the environment or good to do for society, and equally vice versa. But there are just a huge number of drivers for this, but it's still a challenging area for us to deal with.
Yeah, it is, and I like what you say. It should be the next plastic bag or the plastic straw or whatever it is. It would be great to see biodiversity from the consumer point of view becoming that question that it asks business. What are you doing for biodiversity? And that, I think, Bernadette, for you, how does business and the community see the role of corporate leadership in biodiversity?
I think firstly, it's important to say that we feel it has a very clear role,
Yes.
because I think some people may actually even question that. And I think the fact that the corporates have a very potentially positive role is related to Eamonn's point, because you can't, businesses are run by people, and they live, and you can't separate the two. But if you look at, say, the results of the Elderman Trust Barometer that was recently issued, again talking to 1,000 people, employees trust their employers, and I think that's very important. And looking at the stats, I think employees typically trust their employers sometimes more than governments or NGOs like ourselves. But within that, people are actually asking for business to do more. I think the leadership that Intel and Central Parcs and all the companies on the stage are showing is actually becoming the new normal. It's back to no one, be you a consumer, an employee, the community you live in, expect a business just to earn profit. I think that's becoming increasingly an old paradigm of looking at the world. And I think it was possibly what Michael D was saying to us earlier in terms of his call to action, because I think actually the role that business can really play is actually creating urgency. This is really difficult, it's really complex, and we need strong leaders who are individual people, I think, to take up this mantle. And within business and the community, I definitely think over the last 4 to 5 years, we've really seen a notable step change in that this is an issue for the boardroom. People are driven by the risks that they're seeing, but also I think there's positive opportunities to be played as well. So I think corporate leaders can really bring urgency and help set direction, which I think is really what we're seeing as part of the discussions as well today.
Absolutely, no, I completely agree with you. And that's what I see, in the US and the other countries that we work in. There's definitely a change happening with respect to that. Now, I'm conscious that I'm keeping people from lunch. So what I'd like to do is open the poll again. But as we do, I do want to address a number of the questions. And there was a quick, short question which I liked, which was to Eamonn. Are there other ports in Ireland doing what you're doing?
The ports in Ireland are very different challenges. We're in a different position. Our growth is just phenomenal. Other ports have different challenges. But if you ask me, are the ports concerned for the environment, want to do the right thing? Yeah, my answer is absolutely yes. Again, just as I said about our board, I haven't met anybody working in port who wants to destroy the environment they're working in.
Yeah, that's good. The first question was 17, Origin Green. I'm sorry, I don't know that program. Can anybody answer how credible is Origin Green in its sustainability goals?
Probably I'm possibly the most suitable on the panel. I can't speak for Origin Green on that. So first of all, I can't acknowledge or dispute the fact that 5 of its members are top 9 polluters. I know in the past some have featured in terms of complaints, and complaints would be different to pollution. But what I would say is there's about 340 registered members in Origin Green. And just speaking for ourselves, and actually even some of our competitors, in terms of the emissions reduction achieved, it's running into the tens of thousands of houses. The amount of water saved is tens of thousands of cubic meters of water. So it's not to say that everything, is perfect, but what I would say about Origin Green is, again, it has really raised the bar for sustainability for Irish food, and it actually is the envy of many food-producing nations around the world. So there may, be anomalies here or there regarding some elements of it, but I would be a huge believer in the programme, and actually in terms of the positive change it has driven within the food and what actually has been achieved. So I would say to people to look at the Origin Green Sustainability Report, and it actually will show you the scale of the savings that has been achieved by its members, accepting that there may be some outliers, as can often be when you have a scheme as large as this.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think it's a really great point you say, especially when it comes to business, is this kind of purity requirement that sometimes that the NGO community requires, and that's just never going to be fulfilled. And pushing that purity requirement then pushes the activity into the darkness. But if we expect transparency, we should also respect transparency when we get it. And so I'm just going to, can we go back to the poll and get the word cloud? And see if people want to just repeat that. And just as our last, I think this is a great conversation, and I think we could probably go for another half an hour. The person who asked about the small businesses and the financial things, that's definitely a yes. Is it a quick question, a long question, pontification?
With the port being bang in the middle of Dublin Bay, UNESCO World Heritage Reserve, it is so at the same time, it's very much a self-contained city within a city. So will the natural capital policy you're working with, is it going to be looking at Dublin Port engaging beyond the port site itself, you know, with the wider city and indeed islands' wider biodiversity? I'm just wondering in terms of its geographical, physical scope, are you looking at it citywide or is it very much site-specific?
Yes and no. I think the logical area that we would look to interact with, there's the physical area of the port, 260 hectares of concrete, that's 36% of the Phoenix Park. There are the waterways, there's the channel, Dublin Port's channel is about 10 kilometres, 5 from the East Link Bridge to the Poolbeg Lighthouse, and another 5 out into the bay. There's the Poolbeg Peninsula itself. We have significant lands there, but we would look to the whole of that peninsula. We would obviously look at Bull Island. Bull Island is only there because of the Great South Wall. It started to grow because of that. We'd look at the Talca Estuary. So I think that's probably the first where we would draw the line initially. But I think as we get our heads around what natural capital means to us in terms of how do we give back, logically I think we might look at biodiversity outside of Dublin Port. In other words, if we're not able to do enough within those areas, why would we not look down in Wicklow at a native Irish forest or at a raised bogland or whatever it might be? But I think that's a bit down the path of the journey that we've begun. I think the first thing is to understand what it is we want to do, get a sense of the scale. That will translate into sums of money. And to answer the question, I think that was up for a brief minute, about influencing other stakeholders and customers in the port. The customers of the port are going to pay for this within the dues that they pay Dublin Port. It will be a cost to our business. And that is I believe, correct. It's the essence of the polluter pays or internalising externalities, whichever EU jargon phrase you wish to use. But I think that logical area is where we would look first.
Thank you. I think we need to, if you guys want to finish this off, thank you so much for your question, but thank you for your answer. And it is getting on to lunchtime. So before we close, I do want to thank Paul Duffy, who ran the Slido for us, and Jenny Roach, who's our rapporteur today. And definitely thank to all of our panelists. Thank you so much. A round of applause and a round of applause to everybody who engaged. Thank you. And now you can have lunch.